hello, and welcome to the Gnostic Warrior radio show and podcast, broadcasting from GnosticWarrior.com in San Diego, California, to around the world. I'm your host, Mo, and today on the show, we have alternative researcher, historian, and author Keith Hunter. For the past 15 years, Keith has been involved in the hidden history of our world by studying astronomy, mythology, and various religious threads through various cultures that run throughout time. In this awesome podcast, Keith discusses the physics of the music of the universe and the spheres, a magical mathematical system that originated with the ancient Sumerians and Babylonians down to the modern day. He explains this as above, so below Earth energy grid matrix by decoding the esoteric physics underlying not only the placement of ancient structures such as the Great Pyramid and Stonehenge, but also modern military intelligence facilities, all with respect to the energetic Earth form. This is really a terrific podcast, and you're going to want to stay tuned. But before we get into it, I have a quick announcement. First, I'd like to thank you for listening and tuning in to the Gnostic Warrior. I really appreciate the support, and the feedback I've been getting has been awesome, so thank you very much. Next, I'd like to make an announcement that I made in another podcast, and this is in regards to Order of the Gnostics, and it's about a new secret society that's really not a secret society that's going to be open to both men and women around the world. What we're going to do is bring people together. It doesn't matter what your race is, your faith, or your beliefs, but people that are looking to make themselves better, their families, and also their communities, and they can start a website and start spreading truth and light around the world. So we're going to offer various tools. We're going to help people do this through this new unsecret society. And if you'd like to be involved, please let me know. Go to GnosticWarrior.com, go on the contact button there, and you could click it, shoot me an email, and I'd be glad to respond as soon as I can. Give me about 24 hours or so to respond. Last but not least, if you can donate to the Gnostic Warrior, I'd really appreciate it. $5, $10, $20, whatever you can give to help support the cost of the show, it would be awesome. We really need your support. And now it's time for the Gnostic Warrior radio show and podcast. Thanks for being on the show today, Keith. How you doing?
Not too bad, Mo.
Great. And where do you live? If you could educate the audience a little bit where you're from and also a little bit about your background, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I live in England, and it's in the northern England. It is Britain currently, but there's a referendum going on, so who knows, Scotland might be breaking away from us shortly. But I live in the north of England, in Barnsley, and I've been engaged in the kind of research that's included in my book and on my website. I've engaged in this kind of, if you will, esoteric type research for about 15 or 16 years now, ever since I left college in 1998. I think I was inspired by just a few books that I bought, such as Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods, and also Nexus magazine, and that really opened my eyes up to the whole alternative scene, if you will. Things like UFOs. I was even a fan of the X-Files as well in the 90s. So there's that aspect to it. There's the hidden history, megalithic monuments, the whole, aspect even of underground religious threads that have gone throughout our times. All of the kind of banned esoteric knowledge that you get the sense that the mainstream and what is presented is just not quite the truth. In fact, it can be diametrically opposed. I basically went into this initially with an interest in such as mythological tales, like Greek mythology in particular. People have ever seen the film Clash of the Titans, you'll know the main Greek pantheon like Zeus and Hera and Athena, and also other religious mysteries like the Egyptian ones and some of their pantheon of gods. And I was interested in particular in the work of Bruce Cathy and measurement systems. Because I have an interest in astronomy, what I was looking for in particular are some of these key myths which seem to speak of a once harmonious solar system. And this is tied in even to the Egyptian calendar, where they had a perfect 360 days with a 30-day moon month. And currently it's just over 365 days, or 365 and a quarter or so. And the moon month's about 29.53. And when you look at some of the ratios as well, for example, the distance between the Earth and the moon is almost 60 times the radius of the Earth. It's about 60.291. When you study the ratios and some of the values, especially as it relates to these mythological tales, you get this distinct feeling that everything is just slightly out of harmony, right? As if something has disrupted the solar system from a kind of ideal, harmonious configuration, a kind of injection of error into it, if you will. And so a lot of these mythologies refer to planets, the celestial bodies, if you will, and they are personified in the forms of gods. And so we have, like with the Egyptian pantheon, or the Greek pantheon, you know, Zeus, for example, is Jupiter, right? Venus is Aphrodite, Ares is Mars. And so when you talk about disputes between gods and relationships even, you know, they're all about the configuration. I mean, one of the Greek myths mentioned by Ovid, for example, in his book from 2,000 years ago called Metamorphoses, he talks about an affair between Venus and Ares, and they meet up in passionate embrace. And that the sun himself sees them meeting up. Now, if you're the sun looking outwards, and Aphrodite is Venus, and Ares is Mars, and they go into conjunction, so Venus is moving faster than Mars because it's closer to the sun, and they meet up in conjunction, that is their embrace. And so you've got all these little solutions like that, which point towards, you know, celestial configurations. And these configurations are oftentimes even tied into disaster upon the Earth. And that particular one I just noted there, conjunction of Ares and Aphrodite, or Venus and Mars, occurs at a time when Aphrodite's husband, Hephaestus, figures out that she's having an affair with Ares and gets this net to drop on them both. And the net is in fact the constellation the Pleiades. And that was also part of the conjunction. And that even ties in, if you go from the old world to the new world, right? That ties into the Aztec calendar system of 52 years. And they held that there would be a great day of disaster on a 52-year interval because of these conjunctions, and that the earth would shake and that we'd have days of darkness. And so you're also dealing not just with mythological stories, which are kind of an incidental form of story. They seem to encode a kind of lost physics, which if decoded, reveals something very special about certain cycles and certain ages, which tend to end in a kind of a disaster, and then we have to begin again like children, as Plato put it.
Yeah, and,
so,
Keith, sorry to interrupt you. So this would basically correlate with as above, so below. You know, people hear that a lot out there in the alternative research and history crowd, but they don't understand it. So this mythology in regards to the gods and the goddesses relating to the stars and the planets would relate to the as above, so below relationship with the heavens and with earth, and of course with us humans, which are made of the same substances of the stars and the planets, correct?
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the things about when I was talking about this ideal harmonious solar system. I mean, we take like the cycles, for example, 360 days per year was this ideal. We actually base our geometry on this, you know, angular measure from the Babylonians. So we map the very earth itself with these celestial cycle intervals, if you will, mapped onto the earth. And this, there's indications of various grids, if you will, energetic grid lines. On one occasion, it's based on platonic solids. Other occasions are based upon complex mathematical intervals which energetically play out over the surface of the Earth. So in a very physics-orientated way, we can speak of all of the celestial bodies emitting their unique signatures, the music of the spheres, as the ancients called it. They emit their unique harmonious frequencies and receive all of us, right? The Earth receives all the frequencies of the other planets raining down upon it, you know, in a unique pattern. And it's the same with all the bodies. They all dynamically change. So it's in a very precise way. This is where we go from, you know, mythology to physics, because this is where we talk about, you know, as above, that is the physics of the configuration of the solar system and the sun and the moon, and how this can dynamically impact, say, well, for us, the Earth itself, our home. And I believe this is the real physics that links it as above, so below. It's beyond, just metaphor for concepts. I know we talk about morality and things like that, and when we think about religion or spirituality, we think about that, and that's critically important, don't get me wrong. But a lot of this stuff is really to deal with the physics of how the heavens relate to the earth, which is our habitat. And you can even show relationships, right, between the celestial bodies and our environment, which directly affects humanity. And I'll give you a very key example. And this is one I relate in my book, The Lost Age of High Knowledge. As I said, the primary belief of many ancient cultures is that at one point in the past, the Earth truly did have 360 days per year. And it has been transformed to its current value, 365.24218 or so. Now, if you just basically take the current value and divide by 360, you'll get this ratio, if you will, a ratio of change. It'll be something like 1.014561. Now, one of the things you find unified with the transformation of the celestial bodies is the transformation of the elements themselves. And specifically, you're talking about melting point transitions from elements going from solid to liquid or to gas. And if you look at the periodic table, you'll get all these charts, right? Now, we, for example, have degrees for temperature, right? And the optimum temperature for the human body is 98.56 degrees, right?
Right.
Well, if you take the number 100 and divide by this ratio of change for the Earth year, this 1.01456, you literally get 98.56 on your calculator. Yeah. So my contention here is that just as the Earth once had 360 days per year, the optimum human temperature at that time would have been 100 degrees. And the change in that orbital period, which necessitates a transformation of the distance between the Earth and the Sun as well, even, there are laws for that. It also has transformed our environment, our, beings as human, and made us have an optimum, different ideal temperature. So we as life forms have been modified by celestial changes. These are some of the very interesting ones. Even with, for example, elements like carbon. The highest melting point, carbon, is the form of diamond. And if you look in the periodic table, it'll say something like 3,550 degrees, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if you, again, multiply that by this ratio to raise it up, it becomes very close to 3,600 degrees, yeah? And you have, even with Sumerians, they place special emphasis on this number 3,600 as referring to a complete circle, a perfect circle or a completed cycle. It was a royal type number. So you've got, this idea of a kind of perfection in terms of not just the celestial realm, but even the physics of all of the elements, and that it implies, again, something special about degrees as we use them, and that there's been subtle shifts in all of the elements, which again affect life on Earth and our ideal temperature. So it is all tied together. All of the celestial changes, they all affect our critical environment, the Earth. So that as above, so below thing, I look at this definitely in a real physics connection.
Why, Keith, do people out there that get into this type of research and study, they seem to hold on to the myth or love the myth, and they actually believe, there's the group that believe these gods and goddesses did exist, or they relate to them, and they almost talk to them as if that's the truth, without talking about the truths we're speaking of now, of them, Zeus representing Jupiter, who I believe Osiris also represented Jupiter in Egypt. Why do people take these on face value? Do people love the myth because it's sexy and science isn't as sexy? Or is this just because they are profane and they haven't studied these mysteries, or they're not initiated? What do you feel?
Well, I think when you read the myth, a classic source is the one I just mentioned earlier, Ovid's Metamorphoses. When you look at such as the deities of, say, the Greek pantheon, you've got beings which they're like actors in a drama, like given a script, if you will, and they're given a role, they are personified. And so what we're looking at in some sense is how knowledge has been degraded from what I believe was once a high science and a high physics, and it has been transmitted through the descent of civilization. We were at a high point, and these disasters which periodically occur when the planets have certain special configurations, especially conjunction ones, they cause a destabilization of the Earth, they cause physical disruption, and this literally does wipe out civilization. It gets us back down to that low level. And so you've got to ask, how do you transmit some of this high knowledge? And it ends up becoming degraded into the form of supernatural stories as a way to sustain the physics, but nobody understands the physics anymore. And I think that what you've got in this sense, if you look at a lot of the key myths and you're honest in the interpretation, you will know that they were intended, a great many of them, for, personifying either cosmic forces or the celestial bodies.
And now, was this done to conceal it, or was it done to pass on the information?
I think both, because in part, when you look at some of the high civilizations, I do believe that it's not just a case of natural cycles of the planets causing us disaster. I think when we get to a high enough level, we can engineer devices which can tap into cosmic forces, which can trigger destruction for ourselves. And I think that this is why there's an aspect of, esoteric or occult knowledge as being suppressed, because there's almost a certain fear of the science being taken, or being realized. But what you tend to get is just power groups behind the scenes trying to still do the same kind of experiments, a kind of a Dr. Frankenstein or Dr. Strangelove mentality, if you want to combine the two. They do try to keep the high science for themselves and away from the masses because they like control and always believe they can control it. But I do think that a lot of it has been suppressed for that reason. But I will at least just say one other thing on this. I am definitely not against this idea that extraterrestrials or even entities from other dimensions have interacted with us. But I think you've got to make a clear distinction between the mythological stories that are concerned with personifying the celestial bodies and encoding physics knowledge, and other stories which may well be referring to real entities, if you will, which have interacted with us. And I believe that's been going on since, millions of years into the past. I think there was a time when there were extraterrestrials or, cosmic beings that did walk among us openly, and that the general masses were aware of them. And when you look at Egypt, the role of the pharaoh even is somewhere between, a god and mortal. And the whole idea of interbreeding, that's mentioned even in the Bible, between extraterrestrials. So I do think that, when we talk about the gods, there is a class of mythological stories which, is clearly about celestial forces and that kind of thing, and that high physics encoded and even degraded over time. But there are other classes of stories which do seem to relate to extraterrestrials, and you've got to separate the two out. Yeah.
And so would your theory be that possibly, again, this can't be proven, these extraterrestrials or these sons of God were the holders of this high knowledge, and then over time you hear the stories in the Bible about the sons of God taking the daughters of men? Were these just stories of these beings that were of a different race, or possibly an ET race mating with Earth beings, and before they were separated and they wouldn't intermingle their blood, and then once they did, these stories were then encoded, and we are here today, 3,000 years later? Do you feel that is what happened maybe, and the esoteric allegorical stories in the Bible kind of encode some of this mythology into it?
Oh, I'd definitely say that, yes. And I think that's even something that even modern-day abductees even say. And even people who work on these projects like whistleblowers who've come forward to talk about the kind of contact we've had with extraterrestrials and what they've told us about ourselves. And it does, quite blatantly filter out that, hey, we are a hybrid race. We were basically created by the mixture of a primitive man like ape, man or chimpanzee or whatever, but a primitive being going back many millions of years ago. And some extraterrestrials did mix in their own DNA to modify us. And oddly enough, one of the things that you will hear if you go into the whole UFO extraterrestrial, research is you'll often hear about the way in which people or other beings colonize planets. And the problem they've got is, and again, it relates to just what I was saying about the temperature aspect. If you've got a certain genetic type of person, they are tied into their environment, to their planet. They can't just go and live on another planet. You've basically got to modify them to something else for them to be able to exist on that planet. Yeah, and I think in a sense, we are part of the colonization efforts, if you will, of extraterrestrials. They colonized this planet with us as a modified hybrid being, and if that makes sense.
It does, totally, Keith. And could this possibly be these mythological stories such as the Greek pantheon of gods and the Egyptian pantheon, the Jupiter being Zeus and then being Osiris? He's always recognized as the king of the gods, the king of the planets. And then there's always references to very famous kings and Roman emperors such as Julius and Augustus Caesar. He says, my father is Jupiter and my mother is Venus. Never did he say, my mother is Mrs. Caesar. There's always this reference. Are they actually making references to their home planet possibly, and these are the sons of Jupiter?
I think in a way this goes back to this idea of special bloodlines, and it does go back to the idea that ultimately there was a very direct connection of mating between various expeditions, there have been many no doubt, of extraterrestrials with humanity. And one such expedition is in the Bible, right? And so you end up getting these giants being born, right? And you end up getting that. And I think there's always a certain prominence to be had by saying, I'm the son of a god, I'm the son of these deities or whatever. And you've really got to separate out. Again, this is where I think some of the myths are being confused. When we talk about a pantheon of, quote, flesh and blood gods or extraterrestrials, a pantheon of that and a pantheon of gods which relate to the planets. I think you've really got to cut through this, and it's a subtle point, because I do think they've been mixed in. And the other thing is we often talk about other dimensions, other realms of being, and there are other beings within those realms. Like when we die, our soul flies off depending on its fate and so forth, depending on where, what our actions have been, and it will enter into certain other frequency dimensions populated by various other entities. And so we often talk about, the gods inhabiting a different realm. And I know in the common mind we think about death as the end and something different, but in actual fact it's an interconnected reality where it's just a transition to other realms. So we may think to ourselves, well, there's these other beings here in these realms. Are these the beings of myth? And I think there's that mixture. It's just separating out whether we're talking about extraterrestrials or personified beings.
You talk about the planets and the various, basically the alchemical properties, and then there's the study of alchemy, which the ancient Egyptians were masters at this science. Is this part of it? Meaning, if we don't live right and we don't perfect our chemicals and we're always in war and always fighting, is this what happens to our chemicals and we go into that sphere? Meaning, if I transform my body from its natural state and I start thinking bad thoughts, I do a lot of what people would say evil things, I understand that my phosphorus starts turning to gas and different substances, and that's how we end up dying, is from these chemicals. Is that kind of like what hell is?
Well, I must say my own view about hell, and again, I've looked at this maybe from a physical point of view. I don't know whether you've heard of a work called the Pistis Sophia?
Yes.
There's a brilliant chapter in there, because I like to look at not so much the tales of, oh, you're chained up, you're being burned, I like to look at some of the physics to it. And in that particular work, which I'll just say this for the listeners, it's a Gnostic work, and it's been dated by scholars to about the 3rd century AD. And it's apocryphal conversations between Jesus and his disciples and other key individuals like Mary Magdalene. And it's a dialogue form of book, yeah. And this is obviously separate from the Bible. And it was purchased by a Dr. Askew in the late 18th century in a bookstall in London. An amazing find. And, he then went to the British Museum and was translated several times as a kind of a rare gem of Apocrypha. So we don't know where it was before this guy found it on this bookstall and bought it in the 18th century.
Okay.
But when it was dated, obviously, by modern science, they found out it went back to the 3rd century AD. And when we look at some of the conversations in this book, Jesus is basically like he's got all his disciples around him, and he says to them, ask me anything you like, I will reveal unto you the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. And so they're asking him all these questions. And the issue of what is commonly referred to as hell comes up. In the Gnostic sense, they refer to it as the outer darkness, which is exactly what Mary Magdalene questions Jesus on. She says, what is the outer darkness? And Jesus says, the outer darkness is a great dragon whose tail is in its mouth. There are 12 mighty chastisement dungeons, and each dungeon has a ruler, and they change their face every hour. But he says every ruler is one in the other, so that if you speak any one of their names, you speak them all. And he goes on to list these names. And he basically says one in the other. Now, when you think about music and harmonics, and you think of like blowing like a trumpet or striking a string, what you do is you don't just trigger one frequency. You trigger a whole series of harmonics, which give you this rich sound. And these are all fractional values where you say a string is split up into certain whole numbers like halves or, into 3 parts or 4 parts. And you create this rich sound. So they're all basically one action causes to generate the entire sound. And so when he talks about a ruler, there are 12 rulers, one in the other. If you speak any one name, you speak them all. He's basically trying to tell you about the physics, the harmonics of this. And one of the things about harmonics, and again, this is a bit of basic physics stuff. People will have heard about an opera singer shattering a glass with her voice, yeah?
Of course, yes.
And basically, we've got obviously air, right? Air is the medium. When we speak, sound waves propagate through the air at various frequencies. And the glass is this object. And the way it works is, if you've got a physical structure and you have a frequency frequency is just a measure, in this case it's hertz, cycles per second, yeah? But we also talk about wavelength, and that is, if you imagine a wavy sinusoidal wave going up and down like the sea, peak to peak or trough to trough is the wavelength. If you've got a physical structure and you impinge upon it with a frequency, and the wavelength, right, fits in a whole number of times into the dimensions of the frequency, right, it causes the object to go into agitation, an agitated state. And if you put in enough power with the actual impinging of the frequency, the object fails. It will smash and crack, just like the glass. Now, here's the interesting part about Jesus' description of the outer darkness. Here's what he says. He says, when souls, if they've completed a certain number of circuits in life, have done no good, if they then find themselves, at the end of their cycles, and they've done no good and have not received the mysteries, they then go to the outer darkness. And it says the outer darkness has 2 mouths, if you will. It has a mouth with jaws, in its proper mouth, and then it has a tail with a mouth on. And he says the souls enter in through the jaws of the tail. And once inside, the dragon takes its tail, puts it in its mouth. So the soul is like trapped in a loop, right? It's just frozen up. And Jesus, he says, this is a terrible fate. And Mary asks him, how do you get out of this? And Jesus says, well, there's 2 ways. He says, one is if somebody on the outside utters the mystery of the ineffable. This is like the highest master mystery. If they perform the mystery of the ineffable in all its signs and configurations and patterns, they can free that soul. But the other one is this, he says, and this again is a little story from the Bible. He says, you've ever heard you must know of mammon, you must understand about evil. It's important to know about evil just as you know about good, right? Mm-hmm. And he says, you must be as innocent as a dove and wary as a serpent. You've got to at least understand, about these dark forces. And he says, if a soul in life comes to know one of the names of the dragon, then if that soul finds itself inside the dragon and it speaks the name of one of the rulers. Remember, if you speak one name, you speak them all. Jesus says, when he speaks that name, the entire dragon is thrown into great agitation and is forced to take its tail out of its mouth and free up that soul. And so here you've got resonant agitation, right? So again, when we talk about this hell region in the Pistis Sophia, we're getting a very nice physics description here. He's not talking just about the metaphor of people being burned. He's telling you it's all about special frequencies, define this realm. And if you find yourself in there, you must unlock the mystery of these frequencies to get out.
That reminds me, Keith, of what in science they call dark matter. And they say it's increasing around the Earth. That's what the picture I get in my head. Have you found any relation possibly to the actual physics and science of Earth being related to this outer realm and possibly this dark outside dragon being this dark matter?
Well, I don't know about dark matter, because for me, from what I understand by the physicists, is this. When they found out that our universe is not like slowing down, and again, the main theory for those out there is the Big Bang theory. So you've got a bunch of mass all concentrated into a, quote, singularity point or some super dense point, and it blows up. And the idea is all that matter stuff obviously is gravitationally drawn towards one another. So as the universe expands away, you think to yourself, well, if there's a critical threshold here in the power of the explosion, then the matter will expand a certain level and then collapse back due to gravity. And so, to the astonishment of the scientists, I believe this was in the late 90s, they found that instead of the universe slowing down as it was all moving away, per Big Bang theory, it's accelerating. And so they say, well, what do we do? What do we do? It's accelerating, but we can't explain that. So they just came up with this name. We've got dark matter and we've got dark energy. And they just come up with these names to, identify things that they literally don't understand. Because when we think about mass, you've got a lump of mass, it's got a gravity field around it. Oh, that's great, because we can talk about that. But if you're seeing forces operate and things moving away from one another, and you've done a calculation of what you think is all the visible mass in the solar system, and it's not enough to account for those movements, you say, I've no idea what's causing this. I know mass has a gravitational field. So I know that if we've got a lump of matter and it's got a gravitational field, it can obviously interact as a force, but there's not enough of it around. So let's just call all the matter we can't see dark matter. So gotcha. That's kind of what they've really done in physics. It's a total fudge, if you know what I mean. So whether or not it exists is, again, it's just a label they've given to describe something that is happening, and the forces they've identified, the matter and gravity fields they've identified, aren't enough to explain it. So that's really what dark matter's about.
Let's talk about some things you mentioned in your book and on your blog. You believe basically there was a highly advanced global civilization on Earth before our current age. Can you tell us a little bit about this and who these people might have been?
Well, yes. My primary reasons for saying that is a study of the Great Pyramid, Stonehenge, and I even looked at the Mars Pyramid. I'll go into that in a little bit. But sure. When I looked at these megalithic structures, right, and I evaluated their position, I did something that was different to what anybody else had done. You may see people say, oh, it's very close to 30 degrees north of the equator, the Great Pyramid. And some people have said, oh, it was done for special reasons there. Well, what I did, I looked at our most advanced Earth model. Now, our Earth model is of an ellipsoid, a slightly squashed sphere, right? So it's bulging out of the equator, but it's a very precise geometrical shape, this ellipsoid. Because as the Earth is rotating on its axis, centrifugal force bulges it out of the equator and it just compresses it slightly along the axis. So we've got this model. It's called the WGS-84 model, World Geodetic System. And it was done in 1984. Our most advanced model. So I said to myself, well, let's just assume these Egyptians are really smart, or whoever built the pyramid was really smart, the Great Pyramid. And I said, well, let's evaluate its position in light of our most advanced model. And here is what I found, right? And this is from my website, Occult Physics. There's a good article on there. But this is, again, discussed in my book, as you say, right? I just mentioned previously that the Egyptians had a calendar of 360 days, and they seem to recognize we've changed to our current, value. And the value, the ratio between a very exact value for the current year, 365.24218 divided by 360, that value is 1.014561, right? That's the ratio you get. But what I found was, if you take the latitude of where the Great Pyramid is, right, north of the equator, and you find it in textbooks, it's 29 degrees, 58 minutes, and 51 seconds of arc north, yeah? At that latitude, if you work out the circumference, the small circle circumference of the Earth maintained at that latitude, which is a circular value, right? If you take that, and I can tell you that it is 20,917.36 miles. The full circumference of the Earth is about near to 25,000, but it's just under 21,000, the small circle circumference at the latitude of the pyramid. And I'm trying to summarize these numbers a bit in brief for your listeners, but if you go to my website, you'll see the precise numbers in detail. But if you take that small circle circumference latitude, very exactingly given, and you divide it by the arc length from the equator up to that latitude, the very value you get on your calculator is 10.14567. Now, remember, the ratio of the Earth year increase is 1.01456. So you have got a ratio, basically, of 10 times the change in the Earth year, defining the latitude placement of the Great Pyramid. It's a ratio between the small circle circumference at that latitude and the arc length. And that arc length is an elliptical arc length. So that kind of geometry is vastly more complex than simple circular geometry. And just to really ram this home, the full circumference of the Earth from pole to pole, the elliptical circumference, is about 131 million feet. If you were to take the Great Pyramid and just move it 50 feet, just 50 feet north, you would achieve that ratio 10 times the Earth year to perfection in accordance with our most advanced observation of the Earth year. 50 feet. That tells you straight out, whoever built the Great Pyramid was a global civilization. You see, they went to that specific latitude. They could have moved it anywhere they liked, theoretically, on that latitude. So the fact that it's in Egypt means, well, they just went there because they wanted to establish that ratio, right? It tells us that they had a model of the Earth just as advanced as ours. And this is many, many thousands of years ago, if not tens of thousands. And only a high civilization could have achieved that. And one of the things, at least, you've got to realize here is if you go to conventional history, about when did we first know the Earth was a sphere? When did we first accurately measure it? Conventional history will point to I think a Greek guy called Eratosthenes, if I pronounced that right. And I think this was about 4 or 5 centuries BC. And he'd worked it out to the diameter of the Earth to an error rate of 50 miles, right? 50 miles.
How did he do that? How did he do that without planes and all the technology we have now?
I believe this is to do with angles. He got a certain distance on the Earth, and he was looking at the arc of the sun going across the sky, and shadows formed or something. It was some kind of experiment like that.
Okay, gotcha.
A pretty clever one. And that gave him a good rough estimate. You see, the Earth's an ellipsoid, so there's basically a 26-mile difference, or is it 36-mile difference, between the diameter, which is the equatorial diameter, and also the pole diameter. There's something like that. So the method that he would have used, I don't think it would have been good enough for him to detect that the Earth was an ellipsoid because of the accuracy he quotes, yeah? in terms of diameter of a 50-mile error, but it would have been good enough to point out that it's a sphere, yeah? Okay. So, but here we've got, with the Great Pyramid, evidence of somebody, they had to have had an exceptionally accurate value. Your listeners may have heard also of the Portolanos. There was a book by Charles Hapgood called Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. Around the time of Columbus, there was some maps floating around, some very, very good maps. And these maps were so good, they actually had very accurate continent mappings, yeah, which were really good in respect not just of latitude, but also longitude. Now, we'd been able to master latitude because of the sun, you know, being a certain measure above the horizon, and we could accurately track a ship at sea where its latitude was, you know, several hundred years ago. But it wasn't until the 18th century that people began to develop accurate timepieces. I think his name is John Harrison, the guy who came up with a very accurate chronometer, a watch, which allowed us to measure longitude. These maps are floating around 15th century time of Columbus, well before Harrison, and they had accurate longitude. And some of the people who looked at these maps said, I'm just copying one from a map which is more advanced and goes even back further. And so you get the sense that there's a certain knowledge here that's been transmitted almost secretly, based upon an advanced science, that we've had to rediscover in the modern age how to do longitude. And again, it's all about the transmission of this, if you will, secret esoteric knowledge, the high physics. It seems to have never been lost entirely, but has been transmitted secretly, you know, and we're trying to rediscover this in the mainstream, yeah? But a lot of it, I think, is being held back. So when I look at the Great Pyramid, I do see evidence here, clearly, just based on its position, where it was located, means somebody knew exceptionally accurately the dimensions of the Earth. And even if you accept the conventional dating of about 2500 BC, to even have that knowledge then is totally against mainstream history.
Did this knowledge, do you feel that the powers that be, whoever it was during the course of time, and I know over that history it is exchanged, you know, people with bigger armies or whoever take over populations, and these people, is this knowledge taken and hidden by these people, or is it lost because all these people that had it are killed off by the sword, these people of science?
Well, I think this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, you often talk about wars being fought. There are even references in the Bible, and again, these are the kinds of stories which, when you hear about them, they look ludicrous. They look like metaphorical stories, but they may be encoding the use of advanced weaponry. Like, for example, bringing down the walls of Jericho. Here you've got a situation where, I think it's Joshua and his armies, and they're all surrounding the place, and he's given instructions by God via the ark. You know, he says, get your guys to march round the entire walls 7 times, I think it is, and then blow some trumpets, and then all the walls come falling down. Now, obviously, what is a trumpet? It's one of these words that, yes, the people who've translated the Bible and passed this knowledge on, they've started using this word trumpet as a device for creating sound. Now, we all know what a trumpet is in an orchestra, but the very description of that seems to imply the use of some sort of special sonic weaponry, a resonance-type weaponry to bring down the walls. But it's encoded in what is a ludicrous tale, yeah? And these are the kinds of examples you seem to get. There seems to be suggestions that we have descriptions of this kind of technology being used, but because the people who have literally witnessed it don't understand what they are witnessing, they don't know how it's done, they report it up like some fantastic magic trick, or they put it in metaphors. I mean, if you were asked to, you know, if you were given a description of some advanced theory or model in, say, quantum mechanics or quantum physics, and you didn't understand it, you'd put it in words you did understand. You'd make up a story which helped you explain it to yourself, and you probably transmit that to other people, but the real advanced science and all the rest of it, you wouldn't quite get. So you'd almost invent, forces as gods, if you will, personifying forces. And I just think that's how the whole science has become degraded. So this secret knowledge, it is being used, I think, at a high level. And even now, I mean, even when you think about nuclear weapons, I mean, there are some very exotic nuclear weapon advancements that have been made, and they seem to be being used right now secretly in various, theaters around the world, in various wars. And again, this is not being reported. I've been hearing some incredible stories about, how tanks, again, we all know tank shells. I've been hearing stories about what look like tanks firing energy plasma balls from out of them. This is what some of the stuff the US is secretly being reported as using in some of the Iraq war. And when they hit, a material object, they cause it all to shrivel up. And then they get special crews to come in and clean it up to get rid of the remains, so people don't understand what's gone on. In Russia, in the Afghanistan campaign in the 1980s, they had developed these special scalar interferometer weapons where they could literally go right over an area with this beam from their helicopters and just instantly kill everything in their area. So if there were some troops, they'd just fly over. They'd kill them. They would drop to the floor, no nothing. And when people found them, they were in a kind of a strange state of preservation. They weren't decaying, and even all the vultures were avoiding these dead bodies. But what the Russians also did, they dropped these canisters of some toxic gases and whatever at the same time as pure cover, so that if anybody did find these bodies, they see these canisters nearby, they think, oh yeah, it's just conventional stuff. Nothing special here. So you've got all this stuff that I think at a very high level, the most advanced physics and this kind of secret knowledge is being used, but it is definitely being kept from the masses.
What's your thoughts on Afghanistan? I know this is a little bit, it's on subject but off subject. Is that a place where it's like a theater for war for people such as Russia and America to test their troops and these weapons, where it's never won, it's this perpetual thing that we're always involved in because it's a training ground for real live war using real people?
Well, that is the basic imperial model. You always want certain controlled instability in your empire so that you can keep your troops, gaining experience putting down that, and always keep your troops familiar with combat. You don't want to send out an army that's never had any combat against somebody else.
Gotcha.
So that's the standard imperial model, and this is the same with the British Empire, the US Empire, the Russian Empire. Everybody's an empire. Let's face it. And
so essentially we could have a secret brotherhood relationship with the leaders of Afghanistan, unbeknownst to the citizens of both countries, where they're actually have an agreement that they'll continue this perpetual war.
Well, this is the tragic thing about people who are in the military. They are like the most used people going. The political leaders will send the military to a country to fight another military, and they'll practically sabotage the war. They'll tell their military, oh, we're fighting for peace, democracy, and all the rest of it. But there's financial deals going off between companies in your home country and the various enemy countries. And they're sabotaging your very ability to win the war. And they also order you to do stupid things like the US in Iraq and Britain, the glorious coalition of the willing. They go in there, they blow up sewage plants, they blow up electricity plants, they blow up all the infrastructure. And then they wonder why there's chaos afterwards and we can't ever pull out. Well, of course not. You've just blown up the country. It's no longer functioning. And so there's going to be chaos. But what do you do then? You get your companies like Halliburton and all the rest of them go in there and say, we're going to loan the Iraqis some money that they're going to pay to these companies so they can rebuild infrastructure, so you can make money there. But your troops on the ground are caught in this nonsense dilemma of having to patrol this chaos for years while these private companies are making money off the maintenance, of these rebuilding the infrastructure which should not have been destroyed.
Do these loans that they do to these countries, is it almost like a mortgage today? You know, I know if I go take out a mortgage from Bank of America, you know, the banking giant here in the United States, they essentially own the property. You know, I'm just a renter under them, even though I'm considered a homeowner. I'm actually not the owner. The bank is the owner with the note and all the legal priorities. And if I'm not to pay him, you know, on time, he can kick me out and take his property or the entity's property back. Is that the same on the large level with countries and these loans?
Well, yeah, it's
you hold the deed to the country once they owe you money almost.
Oh yeah, in fact, just look at what happened with Ukraine recently. From what I understand it, the Western countries basically overthrew the democratically elected government there to install a puppet government. Then they want all the bases in Ukraine, which is annoying Russia, right? But what they did was the IMF went to the Ukraine and said, we'll help you. Here's some money. So they loaned them a big pile of money. But the thing is, the Ukraine already had massive debts with them. So the minute they gave them the money, it was then taken straight away from them to pay these debts. So you're only like loaning them the money so that they'll give it back to you. And I think in some cases it's done as a kind of a way to avoid the country defaulting, which then would, you know, force major financial collapse in the West. So they don't want their, you know, the person they've loaned the money to default. You know, it's that old adage, like, if I owe a person, like, you know, £20, I've got a problem. If I owe somebody £1 million, they've got a problem, because if I default, they themselves have lost as well. So
gotcha.
It's the same deal there. So I do think the financial corruption, and again, when you mention the US, you're right. You see, the banks, the financial institutions, literally counterfeit the money from nothing to purchase the house from the seller. They then claim they own it. And then they get you to work 30 years of your life. That is work, not twiddly thumbs. They bought it with counterfeited money. You've got to work for 30 years in order to earn the money to give to them. Then you supposedly own the house, and they are sat holding all the counterfeited money, which they didn't even earn. And they got all the usury on top.
And then we bail them out with our taxes when all those loans go bad.
Oh, yes. There's a great mystery to this, because, you know, the Pistis Sophia, it talks about those very things. You see, what we refer to as an artificial corrupt system of fractional reserve banking and counterfeiting, this is a part of the very physics of the universe. And if you look at some of the analogies in the Pistis Sophia, you know, Jesus is asked about a person's, soul and so forth. And he says, well, you need a pure soul, like a pure silver coin. You don't want it to be debased. You don't want any debased metal in there. And then he talks about how a person needs to be made pure and made white hot, as if they're beating the metal out of them. And although he's using all these analogies, this is a physics thing, because what he says about, the end of the age, and even in the Bible, they talk about essentially a celestial bank run. Just like on Earth, the critical element is counterfeiting, and you'll have heard maybe of the counterfeit spirit, right, as opposed to the true spirit. In spirituality, in these books, we're always talking about the counterfeit spirit. It's not real. And the corruption of our monetary system rests upon disconnecting claims upon wealth from actual wealth. Now, we used to have a piece of paper said, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of 10 gold pieces, yeah? Well, what happens is when the bankers start loaning out such money as a loan, instead of loaning gold out, they multiply that 10 times the amount of physical underlying gold. Money is like a container, a claim on wealth. The actual wealth is the gold. And in the Pistis Sophia, a certain hierarchy is laid out by Jesus. And he says, well, you need to receive the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven so that you can enter into the treasury of light. It's a treasury. It's where all the money is. And he says, make sure you've got light in your lamps. Just like the parable of the 10 virgin girls waiting outside for this marriage ceremony. 5 of them have got oil for their lamps so they can light them. The other 5 have got no oil, right? They've got an empty container. And what Jesus says is, you yourself are the container. You must fill yourself with light. And he says, the parable of the talents, right? He says to the man, to those who have, they shall be given more. To those who have not, they shall lose even what they think they have. If you have a monetary claim, and about, millions of other people do, and there's only a tenth of that in the banks, this is why we have a bank run. You run to the bank so you can exchange your container, your claim on wealth for actual wealth, and when you've got it, brilliant. But for those people that don't make it, the money itself literally instantly loses value, it disappears as if it had never been. It is nothing. And what Jesus says about your soul is the same thing. You are that container. At the end of the age, certain forces will become active. The planets will enter into certain special patterns, and there will be a resonant nullification of various forces, a destruction of certain lower realms of matter. And Jesus is literally saying, if you are of the state of those lower realms of matter, because you have not transformed your being and got light into yourself, if you're of those lower states of matter, then when those lower states of matter are destroyed, you are destroyed with them. And this is exactly what he says about going into the outer darkness. He says you're trapped in this loop. You're trapped in this physical configuration, right? And he says at the end of the age, that is at the consummation of the universe, you are dissolved and made non-existent forever. And this is why the central mystery of Christianity is the mystery of salvation. It is the marriage made in heaven, finding your perfect soulmate, uniting to correct this error within both of you that gives both of you the light in your lamp. This is the marriage ceremony he speaks of, right? And this is why it says at the consummation of the age, all the planets, there'll be darkness in the sun, the moon will go red, the celestial powers will be shaken because they have cancelled their circuits. So they go into the agitative resonant state. And this is where the lower forms of matter themselves are dissolved. There's reference to this even in the Pistis Sophia as well, about certain celestial patterns being established and certain hell regions being dissolved when certain veils are, pierced. And this is the whole physics of it. So what we call our artificial fractional reserve monetary system, this is a very deep mystery of the universe itself. And it is the warning with all Gnosticism is about attaining that critical saving knowledge, so that when this realm of matter is destroyed, we are not destroyed with it. Yes?
Correct. And would we be in 2014th year of this age? They have always measured our system or society in ages. So this has happened several times in the past. And are we coming to another ending of an age, or are we there right now, that transition to a new age? What's your thoughts there, Keith?
It's very difficult, because I would at least say when you look at the esoteric literature, they're very, very clear about this. They say, look, when all these things happen, you will have some very special celestial configurations. We're talking accurate conjunctions, especially an eclipse. If you look at Revelation, it definitely talks about that. There's even Greek mythologies which are parallel. Certain mythologies in Ovid's Metamorphoses are actually verbatim, practically, the intro in Revelation to the vision of John when we talk about the end of the age. So if we were to say, what about our present age? Could it be the time? I could say, well, it all depends on the celestial patterns. We can have a whole series of what we may refer to as minor disruptions. We can have the Earth caught in a cometary stream, which can cause us disaster. And that happened only as recently as 1345. It's an interesting point, because when we look back thousands of years ago, we've got all these mythological stories that we might have to decode to see somebody referring to a disaster on the earth through something. But when you look at 1345, more into the modern age, you've got monasteries, you've got monks and whatever, and a lot of these guys are literally writing what they're seeing in a non-myth sense. And what they were saying in 1345 in Europe is that, between Cathay and Persia, a great fire reigned in the heavens down upon the earth, and there was smoke throughout the land and heating up,
and a strange gas, and whoever breathed this in for less than half a day was dead. The strange, these are the accounts given, and they're basically talking about the Earth being caught in the tail of a comet, right? And this is what led to the massive, death in Europe between either a third or two-thirds of the population. It wasn't the plague as such. It was this massive celestial disaster. It not only affected Europe, it affected China, millions dying there. It was a real global thing. It's just like what happens when you get an earthquake, yeah? You've got a city, massive earthquake occurs. Yeah, you might get possibly a couple of thousand people die. But the biggest problem you've got is this. The physical infrastructure, the sewage, the sanitation, clean water, all that's been disrupted. If you do not quickly get in there and set up some functioning system, more people die of disease after the earthquake than actually died in the earthquake. And what we see with these reports from 1345 is, on the one hand, we've got the celestial event. On the other hand, then we get plague. And all the conventional historians say, well, it's the plague that caused all this. Well, yeah, but what caused the plague? It wasn't rats. It was literally the breakdown of the entire agriculture, the crops being destroyed. It was all of that. So we had that occur then in 1345. We had another comet disaster occur in about I think it was 530s. And again, this was what caused the Dark Age and the collapse of the Roman Empire, in Europe. And we had a Carrington event, the big solar flare, which occurred in 1859. If that would occur today, well, according to surveys, studies done by the US, within 1 year, 9 out of every 10 Americans would be dead because you couldn't recover the infrastructure, And so we've always been, in a situation pretty precarious where we've had major disasters, and they tend to be cometary impacts, being caught in a debris stream, that kind of thing. And that's what's resulted in a lot of these disasters. Now, when we talk about the Bible, we're talking about the real end of the age, not some kind of what might be a minor disaster. And a lot of these minor disasters, if you will, they are exactly the kinds that are encoded in a lot of these mythical stories. But you also get the major disasters. These are the ones which involve the exotic physics. It's not just a brute force comet or something like that. This is where the exotic physics kicks in, and you have resonant agitation of all the celestial bodies because certain special patterns are achieved. So you get strange atmospheric effects. Even the sun itself, there's a reference in the Pistis Sophia about the outer darkness entering our world. And Jesus says, if the light of the sun is above the world, then the darkness of the dragon is covered, it's shrouded. But if the light of the sun changes and is, he says, this is the key statement in this book. He says, if the sun's rays withdraweth back unto themselves. That's practically exact quote from memory. If the sun's rays withdraweth back into themselves. Remember, the dragon of the outer darkness is a looping, dragon swallowing its own tail, a looping wave pattern. So we're talking about a perfect, constructive, destructive interference where wave patterns go just out of phase, that it is cancelled. You can do that with sound. You can cancel sound by getting everything just out of phase. Well, the light of the sun, again, is a myriad of different frequencies. When these celestial patterns all line up, yes, there's a resonant agitation of the planets, but at the same time, the sun's light waves withdraw back into themselves and cancel out, and the sun quite literally switches off temporarily as a visible emitter of light. And that is what the days of darkness are. The sun temporarily switching off because these patterns are established. And Jesus says, when that happens, the outer darkness then enters our realm. This is what he's talking about. The piercing of the veils between different realms due to these exotic effects. And it is where, these realms will, if you will, try to capture, I believe, lower light configurations, and this is how people can get trapped in these hell regions. It's like literally hell on earth when the outer darkness enters our realm, because these lower realms would then partake or intersect with our realm temporarily. So this is what it's all about. You're going to have exotic effects in the sky with the sun, massive shaking. These are the true end of age events, but you need to try to find out when we have these special patterns. But we can have patterns. I did an analysis of the Carrington event, for example, and there were two major conjunctions, right, which were involving the Earth, the Moon, I think Mercury, Venus, other planets. There were two major conjunctions centered on the Sun. And it's my contention that when these conjunction patterns are established, this is what triggers these CME events, the coronal mass ejections, and they go in line with the planets lined up in the conjunction. So it's like the energy is drawn to them. The patterns trigger the conjunction and trigger the energy drawn to them. I've seen that a couple of times. And so this is why you get these lower level effects from the sun, energetic bursts like that. Again, they're tied into the physics of the solar system. But it's a higher order, really higher order qualitative configuration that gives you the days of darkness. Whether that is on the cards for our generation, I don't know. It could be that in a couple of 100 years or whatever it might happen. You see, our astronomical models, as good as they are, and even though they're very accurate, they're not as super accurate as you might think. For real precision, I think the V sub 87D theory is one of the best. It's very good for about 100 years or so, but after that, it kind of weakens a bit. Even though it's still, don't get me wrong, it's still exceptionally good. But if you're trying to work out really precise conjunctions and eclipses, it might not give you the precision needed to model this. For all we know, it could be next several hundred years that something major happens. But I do think that the way society is evolving so rapidly right now, we could end up blowing up ourselves by inadvertently tapping into cosmic forces rather than nature taking its course.
Keith, would this be the reason why, there's these reports, and I've seen pictures, and it seems like it's plausible that various governments around the world, and especially here in the United States, are building these underground bases that go miles underground, and they're storing various supplies. Is it possibly that they're doing this, getting ready for possibly an event like this to happen, where they know the infrastructure, everything will get destroyed, but it's like they have everything backed up in a vault under the earth where they would go knowing this would happen and then come back up when it was safe to rebuild their empires?
I think these underground bases are being built for several reasons. On the one hand, you can talk about, conventional attacks between various countries, nuclear type attacks. On the other hand, I also think that this is massively tied in to an extraterrestrial type threat. And that this is what became known, really hit us after World War II. And they were almost building in parallel, a means to protect ourselves, from an attack by extraterrestrials. I do think that is a part of it too. But at the same time, you're right. I have heard lots of stories. They're either talking about a possible comet or celestial body already being monitored, coming our way, and they think we may get caught in the stream, just like 1345, or that it could smear out, if you will, draw material from the asteroid belt towards us and create Tunguska-like, events, because we can have impacts like that. So there is this definite sense that, you've got multiple reasons to explain all this, and I think all of them could simultaneously be valid. But this idea that the powers that be have got some of this esoteric physics to a certain high level, that they themselves know of a certain pattern up and coming that they believe will trigger these exotic effects, that is distinctly possible. You see, in my book, and I talk about, and I know it's a topic that may break enough time to discuss, but I talk about some of the secret physics regarding nuclear weapons and how some of the early tests, they were literally setting them off at certain times based upon the position of the sun, the angular position of the sun relative to the ground site, and that there were harmonic relations, of this high physics built into this, so that nuclear weapons were tapping into cosmic forces to actually trigger some of these explosions, right? Now, I'm not saying all nuclear tests involve this, because they're always advancing them, but some of the earliest tests and the highest yield tests, especially in America, they were actually using ratios to tie together the tests themselves with the celestial bodies. It is a real physics of astrology, but made very real. Now, one of the things I noted from this is that the same kinds of physics involved with triggering nuclear weapons is tied into earthquakes. And I'll give you an example here. This is from my website. It's not in my book because it occurred after my book was published. The Japanese earthquake, the 9.0 one.
Yep.
And obviously that's the one that gave us all the Fukushima and the radiation. So that occurred then. We've got the precise time from the USGS, March the 11th, 2011, 5 hours, 46 minutes, 24 seconds, universal time. We've got a precise longitude and latitude for it, right? Again, you can go USGS. Well, we can model the solar system very accurately, right? So the minute you've got that precise universal time, if you stick it into an astronomy package, like based upon the VSOP 87D theory, you can work out the position of the sun in the sky. And I'll just tell you what we're doing here, yeah? If you freeze the solar system, the rotation of the Earth right at a certain time, and you draw a straight line between the centre of the Earth and the centre of the sun, that line will pierce through the surface of the Earth, and it will give you a ground set of coordinates, longitude and latitude right there, yeah? So you've got your earthquake epicenter coordinates, and you've got your ground coordinates of the sun right there. And just to show you something of the physics at work here, for the Japanese earthquake then, we've got the sun ground coordinates. I get us 3.86608 south, 95.94222 east. Again, these are just summarizing, but they're very exactly worked out. And if you use a great circle calculator, you work out the arc length connecting up the sun ground position coordinates to the epicenter, yeah? That arc length in feet is 21,913,554 feet. But it's very exact. But the point is this. Remember I was talking about resonance earlier and how you've got to have a wavelength that fits into your target object a whole number of times to have a harmonic fit, and this gives you your reflecting internal waves, your frozen wave pattern, and this is what causes resonant agitation of a target, yes?
Yes.
The arc length, right, that separates the sun ground position and the epicenter of the Fukushima earthquake fits in to the equatorial circumference of the Earth practically dead on 6 times. And if you do the calculation based on these models, the answer you'll get on your calculator, right, equator of the Earth divided by that arc length, you'll get 5.9999929. So you'll get like 5 nines. It is so exacting. And it tells you, right, we've just got these amplitude points. So this Fukushima event, the earthquake, had to be on one of the amplitude points of this particular harmonic fit. And you can also tie in the moon as well. I won't go into that, but the moon arc length is tied into the sun arc length. So you get a 3-dimensional harmonic convergence of various frequencies targeting a certain point on the Earth, which becomes the epicenter for the earthquake. So it's the movement of the Earth on its axis, the movement of the sun, other bodies, all the orbits, they're all dynamically shifting. And when they attain certain special patterns, targeted earthquakes will occur on the Earth. And the point is, because our models are very good, they're good enough few decades in advance, you'd be able to model this. And it is my contention that these kinds of physics events of triggering earthquakes, they don't rely on conjunctions as such. They rely on these angular sweeps, if you will, between them. But remember, the esoteric texts talk about massive conjunctions, and this is where entire celestial bodies go into resonant agitation. So if the powers that be have got the physics nailed for how to forecast earthquakes, they must know a lot about the music of the spheres, as the ancients put it, and the science of it. So it is distinctly possible they may well have dates in their calendar for special patterns that they truly do believe they've got the physics nailed for, but which will cause massive resonant agitation of the Earth, or swarms of earthquakes around the planet to a level, which would almost like be equivalent to like a nuclear attack in various regions. They could very much have got that nailed, and that might be the threat they see in part as well for developing these underground bases.
So what's interesting to me, though, is if they possibly have this knowledge and they understand, if they also, they built the Fukushima reactor right there where this event was going to take place. Do you feel that this is a way for population control and controlling, populations where they have these built? Here we have the San Onofre nuclear plants that are built on a earthquake fault line. It just doesn't seem like these are the most wise or intelligent places to put these incredibly dangerous facilities. If anything goes wrong, whole populations are going to be killed by the gases and so forth. Or is that the plan?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, we talk about, the elite wanting to lord it over us and all the rest of it. But when it comes to radiation, like what's happening with Fukushima, I mean, they're contaminating the whole Earth, and they have to live there. If it's population control they want, I think fluoride in the water and them drinking all the good bottled stuff would be the master plan, if you know what I'm saying. I think that, flooding the Earth with radiation is not going to do anybody any good here unless they've got some way of literally countering that within a human body, because I can't believe that the elite would contaminate the planet with radiation deliberately unless they had a way of avoiding it themselves. Okay. So I think that's a fair point on that one. But
sure,
I think again,
thank you for clarifying that. I know there's a lot of conspiracies surrounding Fukushima. So,
well, it may well have been triggered artificially as an attack without knowing the consequences, and I've seen evidence of that.
Possibly an energy weapon from another country, such as the United States, targeting Japan or another country, maybe?
Well, the earthquake may have been artificially engineered. That's possible. You see, The same patterns which are used to trigger nuclear explosions based on the planet are the same ones which you find naturally occurring with earthquakes. So you can stimulate a situation which ordinarily would not cause a powerful earthquake. You can stimulate it. That's essentially what nuclear weapons can do. They can stimulate an unstable situation to tap into some cosmic powers which harmonically converge at the point where the test device is in order to use that energy to blow up the nuclear bomb. So it's like the outward explosion is not a result of the inherent power of the device, but the device is destroyed by external power, which causes the outward explosion. So I think that when you look at a lot of the early reactors and that, though, they were really just trying to get anything going to manufacture uranium and plutonium for bombs, and they didn't care where they placed them. And Japan, I think, especially under the US occupation, they really controlled the economy, and they wanted to get them set up, and they gave, these were all early US plants, so they were built places like that, on the coasts. No thought to a tsunami. I mean, it was just, I don't think it was even thought of the danger of this kind of thing. I think it's more a lot of the lines of we're using technology, we're advancing it, and we're not really sure of the consequences of our actions until too late.
What kind of advice can you give people around the world that are just embarking on their studies of alternative history and researching these types of things, or they've been doing it for quite some time? What advice can you give them, what to avoid, what to look for?
Well, in this area, I mean, everybody's going to approach this, I think, from their own area. I mean, I was interested in astrology and Greek mythology, so I plunged into this area. And then I found all these related side topics as well. For myself, and it's one of the things I try to avoid, you try to avoid fooling yourself, especially with some of the relations and the mathematics of it. So I'm very cautious in what I put in, but I would say you've got to be very, careful where the information is coming from that you are studying. I mean, personally speaking, I like some of the discoveries I've made because I can kind of validate them based upon what we know about the solar system, our models of it, as advanced as they are. I can kind of trust that. I think there's a lot of information out there which comes from sources. I'm talking about whistleblower testimony. If you're into this if you're wanting to look into the whole ET issue, for example, you've got to be very careful, where you go with that, because you're going to get abduction accounts, you're going to get political agendas, you've got to be very careful. I think in studying any of this stuff, you've got to look at what information you're looking at. Where does it come from? Who wrote it? That kind of thing. And was there an agenda behind it? And also, you've got to, even if there is no agenda, even if you can't see one, and you're trying to study something, I mean, it can take a long time. There was a Mayan myth in the Popol Vuh, one of the Mayan myths, and I was studying that for 8 years before I finally had the solution to it, and worked it out brilliantly on a calendar analysis. Again, that's on one of my websites. But I tell you, sometimes it can be a hard slog just trying to decipher one. I mean, you can read a lot of esoteric works, and like I would say 98% of it, or maybe 99% of it off the bat, you will not understand it except in maybe a basic surface way, or in a way that's not deep at all, or it may be impenetrable. You'll only, I think, get one or two key breakthroughs that'll set you going. I think patience and being, careful about what sources you look at is key to any investigation in the esoteric.
You basically have to spend lots of time and possibly the rest of your life researching these mysteries and trying to tie other truths, and with modern science, like what you're doing, could help you validate some of these myths as truth, and where you could put it out there as possibly fact. And there's a lot of people out there that take it on face value. So if you really want to understand these esoteric stories and these myths, you have to dedicate your life to studying it, or else you're going to be on the outer edge, on the exoteric, never having a deep understanding of it, correct?
I would say that, yeah. And I think, again, you're right in saying you can't just look at the myths and the stories necessarily, in their context. And this is the mistake that, a lot of historians do. They just see them as, fantastic tales of, interesting stories. You really do have to accept that there's a high science behind them. You're going to try and decode it, and you've got to make use of the most advanced knowledge we have today. You've essentially got to assume the ancients were geniuses. You know what I mean?
Correct.
It's just like with the Great Pyramid. I said to myself, I'm going to assume these guys positioned it because they knew the accurate dimensions of the Earth. So I used our most advanced model to evaluate the position of the Great Pyramid. I didn't assume, they didn't know what the size of the Earth was. It's pointless. And it was when I looked at it in that way, using our advanced model, I realized they had to have had a model just as good as that. So you've really got to, don't dismiss a lot of these stories. Don't dismiss them as a nonsense. It could be a degraded explanation, if you will, that was once backed by some solid science. And this is why we've got to take the advancements we've made in the modern age and use them to try to decode some of these strange mysteries, because you're really getting some real high gems here, and really understanding things. And I do think that a lot of this relates to understanding the human condition, because I think once you understand the physics of the universe, it does tie into those deeper mysteries about ourselves. I mean, this is why studying things like economics is amazing. Most people would not think to study economics if they're studying spirituality. But if you want to understand about the hierarchies of all the different realms, if you want to understand about salvation and the mysteries of the Bible, you have got to know about fractional reserve banking, counterfeiting, usury. You've got to understand the nature of the corruption right now, because that helps you understand the physics of the universe. There's an article on my website, Ancient World Mysteries, and there's even a video on my YouTube channel where I actually spend about an hour and 10 minutes. It's a brilliant article and video explaining fractional reserve lending, the real concepts of it, and how it relates to how it was built upon, false claims backed by no gold. It's multiple claims on the same deposit. And this ties into spirituality, and it ties in, as I said, more than that, to the physics of the universe. And you've got to never forget that. This is not all abstract. It's not all metaphor. It is about working out the physics of the universe by decoding these stories and then coming to essentially know yourself.
That's some great advice, and that is Gnosis in itself. Before we wrap up the show right now, can you tell the audience where is the best place to find your great work and your book? I know you have multiple websites, which I will list on GnosticWarrior.com, but can you tell the audience in this podcast as well?
Yeah, my main site is called occultphysics.com. That's no space, occultphysics.com. So burn that one into your brain.
Okay.
And the other one is ancientworldmysteries.com. And that's got dashes between the words, ancientworldmysteries.com. There's different articles on some of them. The more advanced ones on the Great Pyramid, and even the Echelon network and some of the secret facilities, that's on occultphysics.com. I chose occultphysics.com because, I mean, I take this word occult in its original meaning of hidden, but it does imply something kind of sinister. And these are the kinds of scientific things which are held back from the masses in many areas. So it's a kind of getting people to understand that, on the one hand, yes, it's hidden, but there are dark aspects to this science. But I mean, no way promoting occultism or anything like that. It really is taking this word to mean its original thing, hidden. So occultphysics.com is my main one, and you can find details of my book via that one as well, and also the Ancient World Mystery site. My book's called The Lost Age of High Knowledge, and it deals with reconstructing the cosmos, the Earth having 360 days per year, etc. And I use laws of proportion based in science to actually reconstruct this ideal system. It's very elegant and very beautiful. And it gives you the ideal physics of the solar system based upon ancient calendars. That's like part 1 of the book. Part 2 of the book deals with the Great Pyramid, Stonehenge, pyramids on Mars. It deals with some of the very advanced ways in which this physics basically takes the values of the celestial cycles and transports them onto the Earth, and shows how they are energetic frequencies with special wavelengths which connect up not just ancient megalithic structures, but even covert military bases. So it gives you, again, the decoding of it. So my book is The Lost Age of High Knowledge, and that's what that really discusses. It's a very precise work, and it basically took me about, this is what set me going, and 15 years worth of research in it. So if you want some of the great solutions to some of the great mysteries, then that's the book. But I just want to warn everybody right now, there's only 40 physical copies left. I'm going to do it electronically after that. So on the physical copies, I sign them all personally, and I distribute them all personally. So you'll be getting a unique copy of that if you buy it.
And that was self-published by you?
Oh yes,
Okay.
I thought that was the best way to go. Actually, it's high quality paper, high quality printed paper case, hardback binding, and designed cover myself. So
Great.
I like to be in control of it.
Definitely. And how are you able to support your work before we go?
Book sales. At the moment, I'm currently unemployed since being made redundant, so I totally rely on book sales. So if you like me, buy my book. That's all I can say.
Definitely. And again, I will put all your information, your websites, and a link to your book on GnosticWarrior.com. Keith, it has been a great pleasure speaking with you today. I learned a lot. I love how you put science to the ancient mysteries and the esoteric, where we're able to find truth. Not too many people are doing that today. Thank you for coming on the Gnostic Warrior, and I wish you the best.
Thank you. It's been good being here.
All right, Keith, take care.